Hey everyone, I'm Nick Gunn from We Are Nexus. Welcome to the studio. Last week I came to you on Periscope and we discussed vocals, tips and tricks. And this week we're going to discuss what some people consider to be one of the dirtiest words in the studio, EQ, equalization. It's pretty funny actually, because over the years since I've been producing and engineering, I know it's one of those things that people always shy away from. And they don't really want to answer questions about EQ because it can be a very confusing matter, and how it applies to instrumentation and how you can make it work for you and your mixes and to make them sound phenomenal. So let's just jump right into this. So basically, let's talk about frequency, which relates to EQ, and what frequency means in nature. So we can get a better understanding of what frequency is so it doesn't intimidate us in the studio. So frequency is a naturally occurring thing in nature every single day. Everything around you is making noise. That just generated a frequency. My voice is generating a mid-range frequency. So in nature, every hour of every day, every second, something is going on that's generating frequency. Even when you're sleeping, something is generating frequency. So the way to best understand this is that mammals, for example, whales, have an extremely broad hearing range with regards to frequency. Dogs are known to have an extended frequency on the high end. Humans, quite honestly, were kind of narrow. So the way we hear, the way our ears interpret, I think Nala's woken up behind me, our dog, speaking of dogs. So the way our ears hear frequency, the way we interpret frequency, we have to devise a way to measure it, because we have to talk about it. And we have to use things like EQ in the studio to make it work for us. So the human hearing on the low end cuts out at about 20 hertz or 20 cycles. A cycle is a hertz. It's the same thing. My voice, a female voice, most voices are pretty much dead center of the frequency range at about 1 kilohertz or 1000 hertz or 1000 cycles. All the same thing. On the high end, the S's, the sibilants, all the high end, all that kind of sound, our hearing usually cuts out at approximately 15,000 hertz, or 15 kilohertz, or 15,000 cycles. So basically, that's the way we've created a graph to measure frequency. And the term for this is called CPS, cycles per second. Now, cycles per second is a way for us to measure frequency and how it moves through the environment. Like a car going miles per hour, we don't measure sound in miles per hour because over a long distance, over a great range, audio sound dissipates and it's not an accurate measurement for us. So we measure it in a very short time space, seconds. So we measure it in cycles per second, or CPS. A cycle equals a hertz, so it's hertz per second. So when somebody says, oh, well, that kick drum is pumping at 100 hertz or 100 cycles per second or 100 CPS, it's all the same thing. So one other point before we move forward to the graph and the computer, let's discuss frequency and molecular structure in matter, because this is very important to know. Everything is resonating with frequency. The way our molecules bind to create matter, our flesh, our blood, this desk, everything is molecular. And those molecules vibrate. That's what holds them all together in a certain form, by frequency. Now, let's take butter or cheese and you put that particular substance in a microwave and you heat it up for a minute. That molecular structure starts to vibrate rapidly. And what happens is you're changing the molecular structure or the frequency of that substance, and it changes form, it melts. Same thing with ice. This is a great way to understand how frequency plays into matter, molecules, and the way we're all built. Second to that, you can also imagine an ocean. Imagine the waves, the really long waves on the ocean. The big rolling waves could be represented as the low end of the frequency spectrum. The big ones, the massive ones, are like at about 20 hertz, 20 cycles per second. And the high ones could be represented by somebody throwing a rock into a pond and the ripples, the ripple out, and they're very tightly wound together. That's very representative of high frequency. So basically, when you wrap your brain around the beauty of what frequency means in the environment, in nature, it becomes so less intimidating in the studio. Because let's face it, we've all been in the studio and some know-it-all goes, hey man, you know, I need more 20 hertz on that, or I need more 100 hertz on the kick. And you kind of sit there and go, oh, you know, okay, sure, I can do that. But it's better if you really understand what you're doing. So let's move over to the graph for a second. All right, Carmen's with me. She's holding the phone.
Hello, hello.
So right here, we're using a graphic T-Rex equalizer, which is an EQ I use a lot. The reason why we're using this today is because it has a nice graph and it's easy to read. And there's a million platforms out there. There's a million different types of EQs, outboard gear, plugins, whatever. They all essentially do the same. Some sound a lot better than others because they're tubes, or maybe they're solid state, or they're just a great piece of gear. But essentially, EQ does the same thing, and most of the buttons, hopefully represented on this T-Rex here today, will also allow you to understand maybe some of your own plugins when you go home or if you're in your studio right now. So I have a kick pulled up, and we're just going to play this kick. A lot of bass in this kick. Now, what you're hearing there is a lot of low frequency. Basically, you're hearing probably a lot of frequency in below the 100 hertz area. Okay, a kick is a great example, especially when you're producing EDM, because you want to get more punch out of your kicks. Everybody wants to get more punch out of their kicks. And how the hell do you get it? Well, there's a number of ways. And if you keep tuning in over the weeks, we'll talk about compression in EQ and how to get really punchy kicks. But for the meantime, we're just going to stick to EQ today. And I'm going to show you what the low frequency knob on this particular T-Rex does. Now, if you apply this to your own plugin, you will notice that you have a knob below here on the low frequency. You can assign a hertz anywhere on this particular knob all the way down to 30 hertz. Remember, our hearing cuts out at about 20. This one goes down to about 30. Or I can select a frequency all the way up to, looks like about 200 hertz. Let's just put it right in the middle. Well, let's put it where kicks are real punchy at about 100. Now, I set the EQ. Now I need to say how much level I want, or how much volume I want of that particular EQ on the sound. Therefore, once I've selected the EQ range, I then adjust how many decibels I want, meaning level, or how many decibels I want to take away. So basically, if we play this kick one more time, if I add 100 hertz, it's going to get a lot punchier. You can see that moving up right here. And actually, this is shelving it right now. This is not a bell curve. This is shelving the EQ all the way through to the bottom. Meaning, at about 100 hertz, it's just giving me a whole bunch of low, as you can see. So let's take that out for a second. Let's go to the low mid. Low mid works exactly the same way as the low does, but basically you have a greater range moving into the mid-range frequencies. Once again, you can select your frequency, you attenuate it, give it more level, or take away the level, whatever you need to do. Now, same thing applies to high mid. You can take away or add frequency, whatever you want to set on the frequency knob below here. Try to figure this out on your own EQ settings. Go through and take a look at what it all means for you as well. So now, these little buttons right here, this is kind of interesting. You'll notice if I give this frequency some gain, you'll watch what's called a bell curve. Now, Nala's playing with her toy in the studio.
With her squeaky toy.
So what happens is if we adjust the bell curve, we can tighten the bell, which means that we are focusing in on the frequency that we want more. Now, if we expand the bell, we expand it to a greater frequency range, covering more frequencies to the more mid-range area and to the right to the more high-range area. Now, if we move over one more notch over here, what we have is a high shelf. This is interesting because if I were to select, let's say, 3000 hertz or 3 kilohertz, and this is a shelf, and I give it gain, you'll watch all the frequencies above 3000 hertz move up in decibels. So basically everything from 3000 hertz all the way through 20,000 hertz or 20K, same thing, is being given 9 decibels in level. So basically you need to go through as a producer, as an engineer, as a musician, and use trial and error to figure out what works for you and what works best for your mixes. Now, cuts are quite simple to understand. When you press the cut button and you attenuate the cut, we literally remove everything in high frequency back down through the mid-range area. Okay, Nala, you're driving me nuts. No, we're not going to play. Okay. So
Nala didn't get the memo that we're in
Nala did not get the memo. So basically the same thing also applies to the low frequency cut. You can also attenuate and pull away low frequencies. And in this diagram right here, you can see I'm just literally left with mid-range on this kick. If I play the kick, can you hear it just ticking now? It's literally just ticking because there's no bass. But now watch what happens when I release the low cut. Now, if I put back in the low cut, it sounds like it's ticking again. That's because all the low frequency has been removed. Exactly. So, bring the camera right around. So basically, what we've learned today is what frequency generally means when you attenuate certain things. Now let's talk about kicks. Kicks can be real punchy at about 100 hertz. If you want more punch out of your kicks, try to give it more level at about the 100 hertz area. Obviously, compression is a huge factor in making kicks punchy, especially in dance, but we'll discuss that at a later date. Great EQ, great compression with kicks gets them really punchy, but stick to working at about 100 hertz. Now vocals, if you want to pop your vocals up and make them sound warm and a little more present in the mix, you got to remember that most male and female vocals are at about the mid-range area, which is about 1000 hertz, 1000 cycles, or 1 kilohertz. Now, on the highs, if you want your hi-hats to be a little more blown out, or if you want crisper highs across the scope, try shelving. Try setting an EQ setting, and let's say starting at about 4 or 5 kilohertz, and adding level all the way up through at about 15 kilohertz to 20,000 kilohertz. To 20 kilohertz, which is 20,000 hertz. You'll find that it will basically crisp up all your highs in your mix. So basically, in short, EQ doesn't have to be an intimidating thing. And when you combine all these sounds together, things do change. And that's a more advanced instruction on what EQ means. Right now, we've just addressed the general principles of EQ, how it works in nature, how it works across an EQ graph, what EQ means as far as hertz and cycles. But as I move forward in my production lessons, we'll get a lot more detailed on how you can combine sounds and what that means in phasing and frequency cancellation in your mixes. So thanks for tuning in today, guys. I really appreciate it, and hopefully we'll see you next Tuesday. If you have any questions, remember to go to info, I-N-F-O, at wearenexus.com, and hopefully we'll get to talk to you some more there. Thanks a lot, folks. Bye-bye.